Our final talk for the session is Charles Kuehn from the University of Northern Colorado. And his talk this morning will be studying our Lyrae stars with Kepler/K2.
Okay, thank you. So far the talks we've had have all been using ground-based data, which is kind of typical for AAVSO members that you're used to using ground-based telescopes, things like this. However, there's other ways to observe variables. You can actually observe them from space, and Kepler has done a phenomenal job of really expanding our understanding of variable stars. So in this talk, I'll look at how we can use Kepler to learn more about our Lyrae. I know Joyce is picking up after lunch with me in sequence, so I'll have a nice little stream of space-based stuff. I'll also save her in the background of introducing Kepler before this. So most of you probably know about Kepler now. It was originally launched back in 2009 to find transiting exoplanets, and it spent 4 years staring at a field in the constellation of Lyrae and Cygnus for this. Now, of course, while it was mainly designed to find exoplanets via transits, it also did a great job of studying variable stars because it just repeatedly measured the brightness of several thousand stars over and over again for 4 years, giving us unprecedented access in terms of observing length, cadence, and time coverage for this, as well as being very precise photometry. Now, we've already heard several talks about our Lyrae, so we're going to skip over the background of these things. But obviously, when we talk about our Lyrae, we're talking about fairly long period, variable, high amplitude, things that seem very perfectly suited to study from the ground. So what can we learn by going to space? Well, it didn't take long with Kepler before we, realized there was a lot about our Lyrae stars that we had no idea of from the ground. The first big thing that came out of this was this period doubling phenomenon. And so this is actually a portion of the light curve of our Lyrae itself. And we see that instead of having consistent heights for its maxima and minima, they alternate between high and low from one cycle to another. You can also see there's the general Blanchko trend here of the peak heights getting higher, but we still see this period doubling, this alternating high and low maximum and minimum for it. And this had never been seen from the ground, and Horace kind of talked a little bit about this last night. When we observe our Lyrae, since its period's close to a half a day, when we observe from the ground, we normally get every other cycle, and we wouldn't see this. Also, the fact is, these differences are actually very, very small. We're not talking necessarily effects for it. The other thing is that the period doubling seems to be a transient phenomenon. It isn't consistently there in it. So here we take 3 different sections of our Lyrae's light curve. And they actually all correspond to the same Blanchko phase. So these are all on the upward arm of the Blanchko cycle. And we notice in the first 2 of these, we have nice, strong period doubling, easy to see. But the third one, period doubling's gone. We don't see it anymore. So while there is definitely connection to the Blanchko cycle for this, we only see the period doubling in Blanchko stars. It doesn't exactly correlate with the Blanchko cycle. As I said, all 3 of these are from the same point in the Blanchko cycle, and the period doubling effect seems to kind of be there or not. We do, however, notice that the upward arm of the Blanchko cycle seems to always have the strongest points of period doubling for any of these Lyrae stars that we found. And from Kepler's observations of RAB stars, we find period doubling about 60% of these things. We think that this actually comes about because of a 9-to-2 resonance between the fundamental mode and a higher order overtone for it. So this was pretty much the very first thing big thing that we saw with our Lyrae from Kepler. It wasn't too much longer that we found some interesting things with RC stars. Now, Kepler's original field of view only had 4 RC stars in it, not many, but we found some very interesting things. So obviously, when we look at it, here we have a frequency diagram here. So we have frequency and we have the amplitude. And of course, we've had the nice, strong first overtone mode that we're used to. We have its harmonics. And when we remove that first overtone, we see that there actually is a very strong secondary frequency here in this star. And the secondary frequency has a period ratio to the overtone of about 0.63. We find this in all 4 of the RCs that Kepler looked at in the original field. they all had this strong secondary period, and that the secondary period had a period ratio to that overtone, that main primary mode, of about 0.61. Now, any of you who are familiar with overtone Cepheids, specifically in the LMC, probably recognize this period ratio because we see this in almost every first overtone Cepheid in the Large cloud. That they have this secondary mode that has this period ratio of 0.61, give or take a little bit there. We find this in all of the Kepler ROCs. In fact, if we combine the ROCs that were also observed with other space missions, in 13 of the 14 ROCs that have been observed in space, they have this mode. The 14th one is a strongly logically modulated ROC star. It doesn't seem to show it. That was the first interesting thing we found about ROCs. They all seem to have this secondary mode. And if you do the modeling, and if you look at these period ratios, you realize that this secondary mode cannot be a radial mode. That this has to be a non-radial mode. So it's a detection of a strong non-radial mode in ROC stars. The other thing you notice, if we then remove that secondary mode and all its harmonics and a bunch of combination frequencies, we see that there's still some weak frequencies down here, but they're there. And several of these actually turn out to be G modes. They cannot actually be pressure modes like we're used to seeing on stars. We actually see G modes, gravity modes, that had, well, been thought to be impossible in our Lyrae stars because these gravity modes should be damped by the radiative interior in the star. So this is actually the first detection of gravity modes in an Lyrae star. So that's what a few highlights about Kepler's done. I could actually spend part of the rest of the day going over the other interesting things done with Lyrae, but I don't have quite that long, and I think people want to have lunch at some point today. Unfortunately, however, I think as most of you know, Kepler lost 2 of its reaction wheels. It originally had 4. It lost 2, so it had 2 left. And this meant we could no longer control its pointing in 3 directions and continuing its observations in its primary field. Fortunately, however, the engineers at NASA and at Ball Aerospace got pretty creative, and they realized that we can use the reaction wheels to control pointing in 2 directions, and if we then align the solar panels just right, we can actually use the solar flux from the sun to control pointing in that 3rd direction. So we actually were able to start what's now known as the K2 mission, where we can look along the ecliptic at different fields. Now, we can't do this for 4 years at a time because we have to keep moving the telescope in order to keep these solar panels properly aligned with the sun. But for K2, we essentially look at different fields along the ecliptic for about 3 months at a time, about 80 to 90 days. And then we kind of step through over time. Now, while the exoplanet people are kind of disappointed by this because, well, with only 80 days, what are you going to find, really? Especially if you're looking for habitable zone planets. The variable star community, this has kind of been a godsend to us because it allows us to sample a huge portion of the galaxy that we can never look at before. Looking at things in the disk, the halo coming up next year, we actually going to point Kepler at the bulge. For the first time, be able to actually do good, proper, high-precision photometry from space of the bulge. And one of the most interesting objects that Kepler looked at was in Campaign 2. And this is globular cluster M4. One of the most studied globular clusters, partially because it's really close to us and thus really bright. And this offers us an opportunity to do ensemble studies of variable stars in a globular cluster, something we can never do. The original Kepler field included 4 open clusters, no globulars. So for the first time, we could actually look at a single population of variable stars in a globular cluster. For this, obviously, I'll focus on the Lyrae stars, but there are also efforts made to look at the red giants here and use astroseismology to determine masses of red giants and other horizontal branch stars. So for those of you interested in mass loss, this actually is going to be one of the ways we're going to hopefully measure mass loss coming off of the red giant branch onto the horizontal branch for the first time. Now, M4 proved challenging because anyone who's actually worked with Kepler or learned a little bit about Kepler knows that its pixels are huge. Its pixels are about 4 arc seconds on the side. And this is fine when you're looking at a random field of stars in Lyrae and Cygnus. However, when you look at a globular cluster, it's a bit of a problem. So crowding is a major, major factor here. Adding on to that, while the engineers did a very good job of controlling the pointing, it's not perfect. There is a bit of drift, And Kepler's spectrometry is actually so precise that the pixel-to-pixel sensitivity differences actually matter. So in addition to dealing with a crowded field with large pixels, we actually have to worry about the fact that the telescope drifts, and we have to correct for these pixel-to-pixel sensitivity. So it hasn't been an easy task. And ultimately, we however, were able to go in and we were able to recover the light curves for the 11 Lyrae stars that fall on the silicon. About 60% of the cluster actually misses the CCD of the telescope, so we only get to observe about a little less than half of it. So we got to observe 11 Lyrae. We have a couple example light curves here, well, one, for B29, which is an RAB star. So this shows just the complete light curve you see. Looks, well, very different from what you get from the ground because, well, you get a lot more points than you can get from the ground. We phase fold it, looks nice like this, and we can see that, well, it's very clearly a Blazko star. And in fact, V29, despite all the previous studies of M4, had never been able to be confirmed as a Blazko star. So in 80 days, Kepler was able to actually confirm a previously thought candidate Blazko and find one new Blazko RAB. More interesting, we did have two RSC stars, and both of these show these same multi-period things that we saw before. That they show that this secondary period with this 0.61 ratio, and in fact, one of these V42 of it actually seems to show a triplet of modes around that secondary frequency. And we're kind of now working on trying to model that and explain that right now, and this is very much a work in progress. So for the 9R AB stars we found, 3 of them have Blazko effect. One of those is brand new, previously undetected in terms of the Blazko effect. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to find period doubling in these. Now, whether it just doesn't exist in these 3 Blazko stars, or whether it's the fact that due to the crowding, due to the extra drift in K2, we just can't quite get sensitive enough for it, that kind of remains to be seen on that. But this kind of promises some very interesting things. So this is very much ongoing work. Hopefully we're going to have this published by the end of the summer. But it's an exciting chance to actually look at a single population of Lyrae for the first time with Kepler from space. At that point, I will now take any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Questions, comments?
Thank you. In the one Blazko star has been found in the 9 RAB, is that correct? Or is that one new?
No, one new one. 3 of them are Blazko. One of them is new.
What is the longest Blazko period that would have been detectable, do you think, in the data available? I suppose a longer one would show us a trend without any...
Right. And the longer ones will still show up a little bit in the power spectrum of it. You'll get a little bit of a signal, but you're still probably looking at probably 50 to 60 days would be the most I would expect you're going to be able to detect.
Okay. So there could be additional ones.
Yeah, there could be additional ones that are longer and just beyond the ability to detect with the only 80-day window here.
Other questions, comments?
You mentioned that they were going to be looking at the bulge coming up. With some of the issues that you mentioned here with looking at a glandular cluster, have they kind of done some estimates of what some of the issues are going to be coming up with the crowding and things like that in that field?
It really depends from group to group. I think the microlensing people are the most excited about this, and I don't think they care for the most part. The crowding works differently for them. As for everyone else, it really, there's been attempts to try to recover stuff, and M4 has kind of been this testing ground for a lot of them. And we can do pretty well with things that have large amplitudes. So we do well with the R Lyrae. We can do pretty well with the high amplitude red giants, so the things towards the very top of your red giant branch. But then again, it depends on how crowded they are, how close the stars. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But we're pretty optimistic we're going to be able to get still some good data out of it despite the crowding in the bulge.
Do we have a final question?
You said that you didn't expect to find gravity mode in the our Lyraes, but you kind of glossed over it. Can you go into that a little bit more? Why would you not expect to find it? And
Primarily, your stellar structure and your models say that gravity mode should be very strongly damped in the interior of these stars due to the nature of its radiative interior, and thus you just don't expect them to actually exist long enough to actually excite pulsations that we can see.
so why do you think that you actually found them?
I don't believe anyone has that idea at this point. It's one of those.
Another outlier in this.
Oh, you actually want us to answer a question? Come on.
Well,
Gotta keep people busy.
All right, thank you very much. Can we thank the speaker again? Before lunch, we have a couple of quick announcements.
this room will be, this area will be locked for security. So if you need your computer during lunch, you want to take it with you. If you want to leave it here, it will be. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you need it, take it with you. If you'd like to leave it here, you can. And that's really all that I have now, other than if you plan to be a driver for the Science Center event, we still don't have any drivers yet, although we have passengers signed up. So it's turning into a problem. We need some drivers. And the next session starts promptly at 2, so please come back early and be ready to be in your seats by 2. Thank you very much.
I got as far as starting out. Thank you, Owen. No worries, thank you. I have a I finished up physics course, and then I have astrophysics department. So there's nothing advanced to take. Yeah, there's so much that gets you skin down right. But if you're trying to go through it,